We're in this room today for one reason, and I mean that, one reason, and that's the Incarnation. If it were not for the Incarnation, we would have no reason to be gathered in this room, especially on Christmas Day. In fact, there wouldn't even be a Christmas Day. I don't know what we'd be doing, but it would not be this. We wouldn't be opening presents later or before, however y'all did that. There wouldn't be any of these decorations. We wouldn't be gathered in this room. The Incarnation is the reason that happened. It's a big word, but it's a word we need to keep. It's not a word we need to try and simplify or replace or come up with something new. We need to use it, and we need to understand it. Without the Incarnation, there would be no salvation. Without the Incarnation, we would be a people without hope. So think of it this way. What does the Incarnation mean? If I were to ask you that, most of y'all would say, well, it means Jesus came to earth as a baby. Y'all would say that. And that's true, but it's not enough. It's not that simple. It's bigger than that. The Incarnation doesn't just mean that Jesus came. It means that God came in. Way bigger than just coming. He came in. It means God became flesh, which means he came into our humanity. He came into our reality. God came into the chaos of this broken world. He didn't stay above it. He came into it. And he did that through the birth. That's what we're celebrating today. The virgin birth, the Incarnation. They're vital to the Christian message and the hope of the Messiah. Don't let anybody ever tell you that the virgin birth doesn't matter to Christianity. It absolutely matters. God of the universe, the creator of the universe, broke into this broken world. He came down into this world through the womb of one obedient Jewish teenage girl. The Incarnation's unique to Christianity. Some other religions have taught that man became God or that man will become God. But only Christianity teaches that God intentionally became vulnerable and took on the role of humanity, being born as a baby. And think about this, the other religions of the world reject the Incarnation. And there's two reasons, depending on if it's an Eastern religion or a Western religion. Eastern religions say that the Incarnation isn't necessary. It's not necessary because God didn't have to come in, he's already in. He didn't have to come down. He didn't have to come anywhere because God's in everything and everything is in God. And then if you're talking about things like Hinduism and Buddhism, we're talking about eventually you become God. It's what the whole enlightenment thing is about. God's everywhere and in everything. He has no reason to come down. It's not necessary. Western religions like Islam and Judaism say it's not possible. It's impossible for the Incarnation to happen because God's too big, he's too great, he's too glorious. To stoop so low as to become a man, what kind of God is that? What kind of great God would you have if he would stoop himself to lower himself to the level of humanity? Christianity says no, that's how great God is. He's so great, he's so glorious, he loves us so much that he came to us because we couldn't go to him. That's true greatness, is the ability to not simply remain above, but to humble himself and come among us because he loved us, because God coming down was the only way for us to be saved. And that's what the Incarnation, that's what we're celebrating today. And if you're like me, you're going to leave here, you're going to spend time with family and friends, you're going to open some presents, you're going to share some great food together, you're going to celebrate. But I want to leave you with something to consider as an encouragement on this day. This Christmas morning, I want us to talk really quickly about two life questions that the Incarnation answers. One of the key attributes of God is that he's holy. And because sin came into the world through Adam and Eve, and because of the fall that happened there, it's taught in Genesis 3, there's a great chasm that's created between us and God. God is too holy, and our sin is too great for us to ever cross that chasm. Think about this word. God's in his world, and we're in ours. And there's no way for us to get to his. This is taught in Genesis 3 when God kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden and puts an angel with a flaming sword in front of the garden. It was impossible for them to ever get back in there on their own. No way they were getting past the angel with a flaming sword. Separated from the place, if you are familiar with Genesis, you know they're separated from the place where they communed with God, where they walked with God in the cool of the day. Literally walked with God in the garden, and now they're separated from that because of sin. And that separation means that now they're lacking peace. People never feel at home in this world. I know y'all have heard me mention this. This is a concept you really need to grasp. Think about it like this. Science tells us that the world functions, the natural world functions on the concept of the survival of the fittest, right? I mean, haven't y'all heard that? That the strong eat the weak, that's the natural order of things. That's what we're told. But do you actually believe that? Do you live that way? Does that feel right to you? When you hear that, it's like, I hear that. No, that just sounds wrong to me. Why does that sound wrong to you? It might be that way among the animals, but there's a reason we watch all those TikTok videos of the dog hanging out with a lion, and then they're just friends. You're like, how in the world is that happening, right? But think about it like this with humanity. Humans don't feel that way. The strong don't eat the weak. And yeah, it happens, but when it happens, what do we call it? We call it injustice. Why? If that's the natural order, how is it unjust? How is it unjust? If that's the natural order of things. When we see the poor and the neglected and the abused, humans consider those wrongs and they try and right those wrongs. But why? Shouldn't the strong eat the weak if that's the way of the world? After all, if that's the natural order, think about this. Humans love. They even love those who work really hard at rejecting that love. Y'all have that family member, right? Y'all going to see him here in a little bit? All right? We love those who don't even want to be loved. We'll continue to love them even when they hurt us. Why? Because that's who we are as humanity. Is that natural? I'd say yes, because that's who God made us. I love that C.S. Lewis wrote about this concept, and I love what he said about it. He was talking about one of the ways that we know we're not really at home in this world is that we're always surprised by the things we should not be surprised at. If that's the natural order, if this is home, if this is all there is, then why are we surprised by things we shouldn't be surprised at? Why are we surprised by how quickly time passes? It's the natural order. According to Lewis, we're not created for time, so we can't adjust to it. So we're always surprised at how fast time passes. We cannot reconcile ourselves with time because we're not created for it, and we find ourselves surprised by it. And this is the analogy that Lewis uses. It's kind of just famous. He said, fish never feel wet in the water because they were created for water. We weren't created for time. We're surprised by it. We're always surprised by death. Why? It's a natural order. Everybody dies. I hate to tell y'all, everybody in this room is going to die. Merry Christmas, right? Why are we surprised by that? Well, we're surprised by it because we long for a place where there's no death. We long for perfect love. We long for things like justice. And Christians can celebrate that, sing about it, even on a day like today, because that's what heaven is. It's the perfection of the things that we long for that we are surprised by here on earth. And if that's the natural order, if this is the way things are supposed to be, why are we surprised by those things? So when you don't feel at home, because you shouldn't feel at home. We feel it, we know it, even when we can't explain it. So what happened? God came into time. He came into our world in order to take us back to His. We also find ourselves surprised by something that, if the natural order is true, why are we surprised by suffering? And that's the first question I want us to look at real quick. Why doesn't God do something about all the suffering in the world? I've been asked that question numerous times as a pastor. Suffering is real. If God is so big and so powerful, why doesn't He do something about suffering? It's a good question. I can think of a better question, but that's not a bad question. See, the incarnation answers that question. It's God saying, I hate suffering so much and I love you so much that I came into your world and experienced suffering myself. And when we see suffering in others, we tend to ask, why does bad things happen to good people? That's a good guy. What's going on over there? But have you ever noticed when you're the one suffering, you tend to ask, what did I do wrong? Did I do something to deserve this? And why is that? Why do we have these pondering questions about suffering if it's just a natural order? The incarnation teaches us this. It teaches us that the greatest person to ever live on the earth suffered. He was also the one who had done nothing to earn it, nothing to deserve it, yet he suffered by hanging on a cross. He suffered, humbled himself, and took on the form of humanity, Hebrews tells us. And the suffering has a purpose. But honestly, the biggest struggle people have when they're suffering is this. They think God just doesn't care. Why, if God's so big and so powerful, why am I suffering? What's the solution here? Why doesn't God do something about suffering in the world? He did do something about suffering in the world. He came into our suffering. He came and suffered. And Hebrews 2 tells us he had to be like his brothers and sisters in every way so that he could become a merciful and faithful high priest in matters pertaining to God to make atonement for the sins of the people. For since he himself has suffered when he was tempted, he's able to help those who are tempted. Why didn't God do something about suffering? He did do something about suffering. He came and suffered. He was beaten, he was mocked, he was spat upon, he was nailed to a cross. And because of that, we don't have to suffer. Yes, in this life, we will suffer. We'll have suffering because we still live in a broken world. But now what happened is the incarnation, as Christ comes down, he bridges that great chasm. The wall, think of a giant wall built between us and God. Christ, the incarnation, knocks down that wall and allows us to enter into his world because he entered into ours. He experienced what we experience. He came and he walked it before we walked it. So he knows what it's like to suffer. And he's the solution for our suffering. All those things we long for, injustice, we want it gone. Death, we want it gone. Jesus is the solution for those things. The other question we can answer from the incarnation is what happens in our future. Now I'll get to Matthew 1. Verse 18, Pastor Milad's already read it. It says, now the birth of Jesus took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And then this is Joseph, think, verse 19. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which was conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son. You shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken to the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. And then verse 24. When Joseph woke from his sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. So what about our future? How's this going to teach us anything about our future? Here's what we learn from the future of the incarnation. When Jesus comes into your life, it does not mean your life's going to go well. Now, I know that's not the message that I'm supposed to tell y'all. I'm supposed to tell y'all, just try Jesus, you'll love it so much, it's going to make everything in your life better. I know that's what I'm supposed to say. But let's be honest, a bunch of us have been Christians a long time, and my life's pretty good, but I can't say everything's going great. Can you? I love what Tim Keller says about this. He said that the incarnation means God becomes breakable. And that means we enter into a life with Christ in that same brokenness. Let's think about this from the text we just read. Mary and Joseph, think about them for a moment. Think of the position they're in this setting. Young, poor, teenage Mary is betrothed to Joseph, which means there's a contractual engagement for a period of a year, which was almost as strong as the marriage contract. The only difference was they weren't having sexual relations during that year. And so when it talks about them needing to, so now Joseph finds out that Mary is pregnant. Now Joseph knows he had nothing to do with that. They're in small town Nazareth. When Mary finds out, we know later in the book of Luke, and she praises God. But even in her jubilation, Mary had to know what this was going to tell the culture around her. A small teenage pregnancy in this day would have made her a pariah, an outcast. Her value was literally, you can love it or hate it, it doesn't matter, true in the culture, her value was tied to her virginity. But as a willing servant, she accepted what she heard because it changed her life, but it did not make her life easier. Now Joseph, let's think about Joseph for a moment. Verse 19 tells us he was a just man. He didn't want to shame Mary, so he considered divorcing her. Now this would be a betrothal divorce, not a marriage divorce. But instead, he's visited by an angel who told him not to fear, don't divorce her. So Mary is carrying in the womb Emmanuel, God with us. She's carrying the Messiah. Now think about this. Joseph had a decision to make. He's making a life choice. He was faced with this life decision. It's the easiest thing for Joseph to do would be to break the betrothal, move on, quietly divorce Mary, go back to work, find a new wife later, live a peaceful life, have some kids. He could divorce her, rightfully so. He could have. No shame on Joseph's part. No shame from the community on Joseph for divorcing her. Why? Because he's engaged to a floozy, right? According to this little Nazareth town. If he would do that, his life would be easier. He wouldn't have to deal with all the drama and all the issues that are going to arise from marrying a woman who's already pregnant. He could have had this is what he could have said. He could have said, the brokenness that's coming into Mary's life, I don't have to have anything to do with. But here was the choice Joseph was making. If he wanted Christ in his life, he was going to have to bring in the brokenness. He could have a tidy life, or he could have the Christ child, but he could not have both. That's where Joseph was. I can have order, or I can have disruption, but I can't have both. And that's what Jesus did when he came. He came and brought disruption into your life. He came to disrupt your future. He came to interrupt your plans. Why? Because he's God and he's worthy of the disruption. He's worthy of the worship. He's worthy of all that's happening, because when God comes into your life, he doesn't come in as a servant. He comes in as a master. That's how he came into Mary and Joseph's life. Look in verse 21. It talks about he took away the naming privileges from the parents. That was there was a sign of authority when parents named a child, but he said to Joseph, Joseph, if you do this, I'm going to disrupt your life. If you do this, you're going to do it as my servant. I'm naming this kid. His name's Jesus. You don't get to name him because I'm your master. So make a choice. What do you want? Do you want tidy or do you want Jesus? You can't have both. You will not choose the name because you're not the authority. I'm the authority. Name him Jesus. And that's what Joseph does. He invited disruption into his life. He stayed betrothed to Mary. We know they got married. And we don't really know a whole lot that happened to Joseph after that. I assume he went and did some carpenter things. Apparently taught Jesus to invent the table. I don't know if you've seen that movie or not, but here's what Joseph does. He submitted his own will his own dreams, his own plans for the future to the will and plan of God. Why? Because a life of disruption with Jesus was better than any plan Joseph could have come up with on his own. He wants to move you from this world to his world, and that means disruption. It means turning your hovel into a palace. You think you've got a good plan. You don't. You think all your plans are going to work out. They're not. See, his world's better because his world's eternal, and the best plans you have are temporary. It is the place, he's creating the place with no suffering. He's creating the place with the streets of gold and the gates of pearl and whatever all heaven looks like, whatever we got in our head, it's better than whatever's in our head, I promise you. Jesus is worth the disruption because anything he brings into your life is better than whatever you're going to come up with on your own. Which is why we surrender. When we fall into salvation, when we fall into love with Jesus, our plans, our goals align with the will of God and the plan of God. And this Creator will guide us because he knows better what we need than we know what we need. But what that means for your future is that it's guided not by you, but guided by God. And it means eternity in heaven with him if you surrender your life to him. And that's only possible because of the incarnation. It's only possible because Christ came into humanity. He came into suffering. He came and brought disruption. You don't think Jesus brought disruption into the world? We changed the way we talk about time because of Jesus. You don't think he brought disruption into the world? We're in this room today with lights and Christmas songs because of Jesus.